Okay, welcome to another edition of Notes from Erin. I'm so excited today to have a guest. I am joined by author Tiffany L. Warren, and we'll be talking about her new novel. Tiffany, if you can you introduce yourself to readers and then we could get started?
Yes, so my new book is A Harlem Wedding. It's historical fiction, but I've been writing since 2003. I got my first book deal in '03. First book dropped in '05. So I've written over 30 novels in inspirational fiction, women's fiction, young adult, sci fi, and now historical fiction. I have had multiple books made into films on BET Plus. I just shot my first feature film with my husband and I production company, Warren Productions. We just did our first feature film this past January. So there's a whole lot that I do with storytelling for the stage, film, and novels. So I would call myself a storyteller and not just a novelist.
I love. Well, I have so many thoughts on what you just said, but I guess for one, before I go into that, like what got you into storytelling and what made you want to be a writer and tell different stories?
So I started reading very early. I was 4 and went into kindergarten reading chapter books. And reading as a kid was like always an escape for me. I would go to the library and check out 10 to 15 books at a time. The librarians thought I was checking out books for my mom because I was reading Alice Walker when I was 12.
Oh,
And, I think that love of books and love of stories and seeing how stories could transport you to another place and just help you like I didn't have the greatest childhood. It let me see that other people in the world had situations and things that they had to overcome. And so that just gave me strength. And I always say that fiction is a window and it allows you to have empathy for other people in the world. So I fell in love with stories at a very young age, and then I just started. I think this hits everybody who is has a writing gift. At some point you read something that you could have done better, and that you're like, wait, now this person wait a minute, I could do better than this. And so that's kind of where the story started. Like I think I read maybe a Babysitter's Club book or something that was just like super basic storytelling and very entertaining. But I was like, I could do this. I could write this. And then I think I had the biggest epiphany when I read Octavia E. Butler. I did not know she was a Black woman at first because her early novels had white women on the covers. It was her first book came out in the 1970s. And I started reading her as an early teenager. And when I found out she was Black, I think I found out she was Black when I read Kindred. I read her first series, the Xenogenesis series, that had white people on the cover and aliens. The first one had a white woman on the cover. But then when I read Kindred, I found out that she was Black and I was hooked. I was like, wow, a Black woman writing sci-fi. If she could do this thing, I can. So that's kind of where my origin story, I guess, as a storyteller began. And I just love every aspect of it. I like seeing my words immortalized by actors. Film. I love the theater because you can then incorporate music, and I'm a songwriter, a poet. So any way that I can get the story across and whatever moral or theme that I'm trying to give to the audience or reader, I'll take it all.
well, and I love that. So I guess for so much of what you just said, for you, like because you write in so many different mediums, like you write sci-fi, you write historical fiction, you also do like screenwriting and you do music writing. I guess where are you finding all of your creativity? Because I think that that's so many different lanes and also especially like with quantity as well. And I would say like from quality too after reading your book as well. Like how are you able to find all of that creativity and the stories that you choose to tell?
Stories come to me from everywhere. Like I will listen to an especially moving song. I heard a song last night, Bless the Telephone. It's an old folk song, very beautiful, simple melody about someone who is, you know, feels love for their partner, and the telephone calls make them not feel alone. Like that made me want to write a
That's
romance,
beautiful.
right? So I get inspiration from everywhere. Like, I'll see one time I was in the airport, and I haven't written this story yet, but I made notes. I was in the airport and I saw a man in a wheelchair, but he was devastatingly handsome. Talk about like Tom Cruise and like all the white hunks combined into one. And he was in a wheelchair and paralyzed, right? And I wondered, I was like, you know, can does he have someone? Would he? Is he able
Hmm.
to? And it just made me feel like I wanted to write a story about someone confined to a wheelchair in a romance story. I haven't even written a romance novel yet, but I have notes of all these, I like sad love songs. So like sad love songs inspire me. And so I could see that like so it's everywhere. Everywhere I go, there are stories waiting to be told. And I just wait until they drop into my spirit and then I just go.
Well, I guess this is going to be a pivot, but like you like sad love songs. So if you could say like, what is a sad love song that you think would be a good book?
Oh, lots. So many. Heartbreaker by Dionne Warwick shows the
Mm.
evolution of a relationship that's like falling apart. Like, why did you have to be a heartbreaker when I was being what you wanted me to be? Like the lyrics just
Hmm.
lend themselves. Babyface has a bunch of them. When can
Yeah.
I see you again? There are so many.
Oh,
Listen
that would be a
to
good
sad
one.
love songs, and I'm telling you, you hear a romance story because it, you can pull the sadness into a happily ever after. You just have to do the story as a writer and figure out like what that journey looks like, what the obstacles in the romance will be. But yeah, like for me, the sad love songs evoke those good emotions that will translate to the page. If I can make a reader cry, I'm like, yes,
No, I
score.
could I could definitely see that because I think like when I think of one of my favorite sad love songs, it's Heather Headley in my mind, and
Oh
I feel
yeah, that's a
like that
good
would
one.
be a good book to read. I love. Okay, so let's talk about A Harlem Wedding.
Okay.
So I loved this book. I was like jotting down a whole bunch of notes, and then I Googled people after. Well, okay, so first, can you give a description of the book, and then I'll
Yes.
go into my
So,
questions.
A Harlem Wedding is about the series of unfortunate events that led the it girl of the Harlem Renaissance, Yolande Du Bois, daughter of W.E.B. Du Bois, down the aisle with queer Harlem Renaissance poet Countee Cullen. And so it's not just about that one day. I keep seeing folks saying, oh, well, it's not just about the wedding. I think, it's about everything that got her to that one day because Yolanda was going to have a Harlem wedding regardless. Like we just didn't know who it was going to be with. And so when we finally get to the wedding and the story, it's such a turning point and almost the dark moment for our character. And so it's about how do we get from this love of her life, Jimmy L. Lunsford, who was a jazz musician that she met and went to Fisk University with. How do we get from there, and he was fine too, right? But how do
Well,
we
yeah, I
get from
Googled him.
him to little old potbelly Countee Cullen? And that's the journey that we're on.
Yes, he was definitely fine because that was one of the notes that I wrote. I was like, oh, because I had never seen him before, but I was like,
Hmm.
and I think it's interesting that you said that people, when they're reviewing it, they're saying that one wedding because I wondered if, I mean, I know that that's partially why it's titled that, but there's also other weddings that happen within the book too. So I thought it was kind of like tying them all together in a way because they all technically have some impact to her as a person.
Right. And she was engaged multiple times
Mhm.
before she made it down the aisle with Countee. Countee was also engaged to somebody else. So it's basically the idea that within the talented 10th, which was W.E.B. Du Bois's theory of, there are 10% of Black people who are gifted and talented. And if they just lean into those gifts and, procreate with each other and make more gifted children, that they could elevate the Black race to the point of erasing the color line, right? That was the theory. And so it was very weddings and marriage and, creating gifted progeny was part of their duty. They felt that that was their duty. If you're gifted, then you need to, help reach back. That's the part of the theory that I appreciate, that reaching back part and uplifting others. What I don't agree with is that there's a select few of the black elite that are more gifted than folks who maybe weren't born into money or means. So that's, everyone can argue W.E.B. Du Bois's theories, at another time, but he used that to really guide and force his daughter into his plans for her life. He wanted her to carry forth his legacy. She was their only surviving child. So they had a son that died. And so because she was the only one, she had to give him, gifted grandchildren and great grandchildren who, carried on his work. That's what he wanted.
Well, with that, one, what made you want to write about her? Like, how did the story come to you? And then also, even looking at their relationship and how he had so much influence over her, why did you want to show that dynamic too? Because I feel like I keep reading about him recently, and I think I keep getting different thoughts about him that I did not initially know. So, what about him also?
So I definitely wanted the story for the salacious aspect of it, right? If you're gonna have a historical fiction novel, yes, it's gonna teach you history, but you have to be entertained. It is a novel, right? And so when I was looking for a time period to go back in time to kind of immerse myself in, there's only one period in this nation's history that I, as a black woman, would feel safe to go back to, and that's 1920s Harlem. Not 1920s Tulsa, okay, Harlem
No.
only. And so Yolande just stood out as she was the princess of the Harlem Renaissance. She was everywhere. She was like, I call her the Lori Harvey of the Harlem Renaissance because everybody she dated was news, where she went to the parties, what she wore. She was that girl. And so, who better of a heroine? Now, as for WEB, the reason why I wanted to focus on that conflict between father and daughter is because it jumps out at you from the correspondence between them. He is very much in letters instructional to his daughter. There's love there, of course. He dotes on his daughter. He spoils her rotten. But the letters are instructions also on how to, comport herself in public, how to be a woman, even what to eat, right? So
Hmm.
that her health is good. He was very much that, overbearing father, but also a helicopter dad, like just very much loving, but wanted the best for her. And only he got to define that in his mind,
Hmm.
what the best for her was. There was a letter that Yolande had written to her father, and she was raving about Jimmy Lunsford. She was head over heels. And he comes back with, I'm not paying Jimmy too much attention. Well, that let me know this is the perfect setup right here. Baby girl's in love. Daddy's like, no, ma'am. And we're off to the races. Like it was just, right
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
storytelling. What I will say about, the different aspects that we're seeing of W.E.B. Du Bois, he was an icon and a tremendous civil rights leader, brilliant man, one of the most educated men of his time, not just black men, the most educated men. He had a PhD from Harvard. He was a genius, right? And so you have to separate, I think, the iconic things that he did from the ordinary man that he was. He was a husband, a philandering husband, and an overbearing father. That doesn't mean that his spectacular achievements are any less. I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of historical fiction, that you really get to look at these people who have done outrageously fabulous things through the lens of their humanity. And you know, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And that, I think, is a lesson to all of us. None of us are perfect, right? But that doesn't mean you can't make a difference in the world. That doesn't mean you can't do something extraordinary just because you got a few skeletons in your closet. Because WEB had a whole closet full of them. They just fell out when you open the door. So, but he still managed to be iconic in our struggle for civil rights in this country. So, I don't think it's wrong to portray him in his true form and his truth, to see him as a family man and to see him as a civil rights leader. They are, that's the dichotomy of us all. We all have the ability to do amazing things, and we all have the ability to be messy. Like, that is just the truth of humanity.
And I think you did a good job at that because I think you could see that he means well with his daughter, but then you can also see that he is a little, well, he's philandering because I feel like also when I saw Jesse as a relationship in the book, I was like, Jesse and him, they intermingled. So then I was like, and then he kept saying the stuff about marriage, but then you could tell that he was really trying to look out for his daughter. But then you could also see like when he would come to the school, how everyone kind of like even like Jimmy was so fascinated by him.
Yeah,
So I think you did a really good job at that.
thank you.
And then also going back to Jimmy, so with Yolande and Jimmy, how was it writing their love story? Because I felt like I really enjoyed it because I feel like he really liked her. Because I feel like there would be different things that happen. And I feel like some people may just kind of like walk away and be like, well, you are prioritizing your dad's opinions, you're prioritizing this and not me. But I felt like he kind of used that as like an obstacle to show his love more. So, how was it crafting their story together?
So what I love that I was able to see Jimmy's like sweet notes and telegrams and greeting cards that he gave to Yolande, because you get to see who he is as a person. In Yolande's scrapbooks that I was able to view at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, there are so many photographs of Yolande and Jimmy on campus, her holding his arm and smiling up at him. And you could just see the love there. And it's so funny. There's a photo of her and Jimmy in that pose, and then a photo of her and someone else. And the love just doesn't pop off
Mm-hmm.
the pages the same way. So being able to just like see these 100-year-old sweet notes. And Jimmy would go to an away game. Now she's back at campus, and he would rush to send her a telegram to let her know if they won the game, because there's no telephone. So let me run down to the, delicatessen or whatever and send my sweetie a telegram to let her know we won. Those kinds of things let me know that Jimmy was just such a sweet and caring boyfriend, that he was easy to characterize. Yolanda was a little bit more complicated, but even her personality, like, she was snarky. One thing she used to love to say, her favorite phrase in her letters was little old me. And I can imagine her being in heaven saying, "Oh, somebody wrote a book about little old me." I love her personality. She was snarky, witty, and even seeing things like there's a character in the book, Crystal Tully, that we won't spoil and tell who Crystal is. But the first thing that I saw about Crystal was in Yolande's diary, and she had written that she had tragic hair. Just made me bust out laughing, because this was even before Jimmy got to Fisk. She had already decided that this girl was on the, no contact.
Yes. Yes. And like I said, after I was Googling stuff and I Googled Crystal, I rolled my eyes.
We're all gonna roll our eyes about Crystal Tully, okay?
Yeah, I was like, ugh. No, and I think it's true what you said because I do think you could see their love through the pages. And I think even sometimes too, when like Yolande was thinking in her head and saying stuff as the narrator, I think you could see how much she loved him. It just seemed like they were always conflicted. And there was one thing that Jimmy said that I loved. He said, it was like they were having a conversation and he said, it was like a music thing. He said that his teacher back home told him that music is the language of the soul. And then she said, well, I don't play music, but I loved that dialogue of them back and
Mhm.
forth together.
Yeah. Loved writing their conversations and their dialogue. I enjoy writing dialogue anyway, but I really like the conversations between Yolanda and Countay. And during my research, Gail has online about 80 letters between Yolande and Countay that span from 1923 to 1928. They were donated by Harold Jackman, who was Countay Cullen's best friend and the best man in the wedding. So you get to see the letters that Yolande sent to Countay, and just they're reading the letters between them allowed me to like get the language of the day, and just to even see the layers of their friendships. Because you know Count and Yolande's wedding is often described, like if you Google, as an arranged marriage, but it was a little bit more complicated than
Hmm.
that because they were such good friends. They met in 1923. They don't end up marrying until 1928. Reading all the letters, you could see the evolution of their relationship, and it wasn't just a, you know, arranged marriage where her father said this is who you'll marry, but we do know that WEB approved of Countee in a way that he rejected Jimmy and jazz music in general.
Yeah, which I found to be interesting because I think when I saw that they got married, I felt because they clearly had such a good friendship that I don't know if I like in my head, I don't think I would have thought it would have transitioned to marriage, but then also you kind of know in a way for him what was a part of that, like with his sexuality and stuff like that too, and wanting to appear one way. But I think even like the way that you wrote their relationship and their friendship, I loved the way it was, but I think I also felt sad once they got divorced, once I knew how their friendship was
And
as
they
I was reading.
remained friends even after the divorce, right? But you just said something about Countee wanting to appear one way. I'm not quite sure we can characterize Countee's actions that way. So
Okay.
2026,
Oh, true.
the lens of what we're looking at, you've got download people, you've got, Countee was certainly queer, but he also understood that it was his duty to marry and have
Hmm.
children. He was a young man. And so I don't think he felt he had a choice in that matter,
Hmm.
even though he knew he was attracted to men. I don't know that he wasn't bisexual. They didn't have those labels. It
Yeah.
was you were who you were.
Hmm.
Countee was certainly a member of, the queer artist society a little bit of Harlem, but he was also very active in the buttoned up, respectability politics part of Harlem. His father was a pastor of Salem United Methodist, and he was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. He was an upstanding member of society,
Hmm.
and not that being queer made him not upstanding, but there was just two different parts of Harlem. And
Yeah.
Countee was a member of both.
That's thank you for calling me on that because that is true because I think sometimes too like we read from the perspective of where we are, but
Yep.
then that's also not where we are because we're reading something from the past. So I think thank you for that. And then one thing that you also said too is the letters that went back and forth. And I think like when I was reading, one of the things I really liked is because you have like the friendship ones, you have the platonic ones like between Yolande and Margaret,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also have the ones with love with her and Jimmy. So for you, like, and I know you've mentioned the letters too as you read them, like how important was it for you to incorporate those within the book too? Because I think they tell another story as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, because that was their main, mode of communication. And it's just so important. And even there's a period where, Jimmy and Yolande don't write to each other in the novel. And it's, that you start to see the evolution of their relationship from, this hot, steamy romance to what's going to happen to us. And of course, the love is still there, but it's not as hot anymore. And so now what? But I think that was so important because all of my research, like I went to the Schomburg Center in New York for 3 weeks. I stayed there, going every day, looking at letters on microfiche. Some of them were messy. The really messy ones were in French. And just getting to know them as humans and their friendships, their gossip, the things that they spoke about that they didn't think anybody 100 years later would be reading about, like
Hmm.
they're bashing each other's writing and letters. It's hilarious. There's a letter that really tickled me from Countee to Harold Jackman where he says Yolande isn't really much to look at, and I'm like, bro, have you seen you, like you are talking about she wasn't cute, you wasn't cute either, like come on. So the letters were just, added so many layers to just the facts, right? You
Hmm.
get the facts. The fact is Yolande married Countee Cullen. The fact is they had 3,000 people at their wedding. But what was beneath the surface, and seeing those private conversations just helped paint a more accurate and a more layered picture of
Hmm.
the situation.
No, I love. And then also going to their wedding. Their wedding was like a grand, grand, grand wedding. I can't imagine having that many people at my wedding or those many bridesmaids that she had.
Right.
So what was it like pulling the information for that and then writing that out too? Because yeah.
There was so many letters because W.E.B. Du Bois was in charge of this wedding, right? This was his wedding, pretty much. And
Yeah.
there was a funny argument back and forth about the number of bridesmaids. He thought that, he wrote Yolande and said 16 bridesmaids is ostentatious. And I love that she asserted herself like, I don't care, daddy. Like, you are having me, or Papa, she called him Papa. I don't care, Papa. You got me marrying Countess. I'm not unasking my friends. They are going to be in my
Hmm.
wedding. So she had her 16 bridesmaids, even though Countess only had 8 or 9 groomsmen. She didn't care. They didn't if they didn't need a partner. And you know, so getting those little tidbits and the little like seeing how WEB booked the Walker studio for a reception, but then not only could he not afford the rent, but the guest list had ballooned to at 1,500 invited. So then he ended up having tuna sandwiches and cake in the basement of the church. This the details of this in the letters, because WEB kept everything. Like if you go on University of Massachusetts Amherst has the WEB Du Bois papers. There
Oh
are
wow.
wedding invitations, guest lists, receipts for the flowers, the drivers, like everything is listed. And then, of course, like I said, Yolande was the it girl of the Harlem
Hmm.
Renaissance. So every detail of the wedding was in the newspapers. There was a journalist, Geraldine Disman, who wrote every gossip column in every black gossip column in the United States, like for every newspaper. And so there were photos of Yolande going from the train station with her bridesmaids in Baltimore, with her little fur coat on. Like everything was in the newspaper, every detail of it, what kind of ring she got. So that part was juicy for me as an author. All I had to do was go and collect
Hmm.
the details and put them together. It wasn't very hard. Like there are many things in the book that are fiction, and mostly what I will say is fiction is I would read a letter and say, well, I'm not just going to have a the letter in the book, but I can pull out the scene that happened to inspire this letter. Like what happened to have this letter written? Or like Countess wrote a poem about Yolande. And if you look it up now, it says, I think it's, I can't think of the title of it, but in the parentheses, it says for Yolande, right? So you know this is a poem that was inspired by his friendship with Yolande. And so when I read the poem, I said, I wonder what situation or what event inspired him to write this poem. And so I just created one. Like that is, the fictional part of it is you have the facts and not just, well, what did people say in the room at like what did they whisper to each other at the party? And I think I kind of shy away from some of that because I'm more into what got us here. What is the why beneath the what, where, when, and how? That's kind of my process for historical fiction.
Well, yeah, because I was curious because I feel like as a reader who has never wrote historical fiction, it seems like that is would be maybe like not the challenge, but I mean not necessarily like a negative challenge. Like it could be a fun challenge to figure out what shapes these things because you have to like create a story that's obviously like interesting for people, but you still have to have the integrity of the story. So I did wonder like how that process is. Is it like hard? It
Well,
seems like
yeah, so like with regular fiction, I am doing, I know who my protagonist is. They're usually flawed, because a flawed protagonist is a relatable protagonist. That's why it tickles me if people say, "Oh, well, I didn't like Yolande." Well, she's flawed. Good. I'm
mm-hmm,
glad you didn't like her.
mm-hmm,
And so you have a flawed protagonist, you have the thing that they really want that is usually one of these, just big universal wants, right?
mm-hmm.
That would connect for a lot of people. And Yolande more than anything wanted love, right? So that's a universal thing. So her goal was to have the love of her life. And then the moral or the theme is what is the protagonist going to learn along the way? And what do you want the reader to take away? And so in this story, Yolande learns that she's worthy. So it's all about work. And that's what I want the reader to take away from the story as well. Now, that's typical fiction, right? But when you have historical fiction, you have this treasure trove of information and research that happens first before you write one word on the page. So, what I did, I read all the letters, I immersed myself, I took notes. Oh, this will be a good scene. And then I set that research to the side and I thought about the major conflicts that Yolande had, and how I wanted to translate that into that framework of a story that I just described. And then, of course, you start to relate back to the research. So as you're writing, like if I wanted to send her to a party, okay, well, who all was there? Now I'm going back to my research. And that is kind of my process for historical fiction is a melding of the facts and the fiction and just trying to find that strike that balance between what is fact and then what is my imagination of how the facts unfolded.
No, and I think I love that because I think that that's also why I enjoy historical fiction so much is because I feel like you get to learn about people that you don't know because I didn't know about Yolande before. Like I obviously knew about W.E.B. Du Bois from school and just from life, but I don't even know if I really knew about like his outside life. Like I knew he had I assumed he had kids. I don't think I really even thought that much about it either, but I feel like what I really enjoyed about this book is because I learned about him. I learned about his daughter. I learned about her life. And then I also got like a really good story too. So like I was both enjoying what I was reading and then I also felt like I was learning. I felt like it bridged the world of both. And so, and I guess one thing also just going into the music aspect and your musical background too. And I think one thing I loved is because typically I like to bridge books and music together. And I think that this book did that beautifully. Like, I didn't really know about Jimmy before either. And so I guess for you, like, what if you, well, twofold. So if you had to think of one, like the music of the era, what would be like, well, I guess I'm going to change this. If you had to think, well, okay. So, one, how important was the musical element? And then also, because you do enjoy music and you have your music background, like, did you have like a writing soundtrack or something that kind of put you in the zone as you were writing this book as well?
So, of course, the music in this novel is very important. It is even giving us a little bit of Black mysticism, a little bit with the connection between Jimmy and Yolande that was kind of underscored by his music and the wish that they made at the wishing tree, right? But as far as a soundtrack, what I know is there's one song that just kept sticking out to me, and that is Congratulations by Vesta Williams. And when somebody gets to the wedding scene, they'll know exactly why that song was playing in my head. And earlier this year, I put just a little reel, not a reel, but a photo collage on Instagram, and I put congratulations. So you that post went almost viral because people were like, "Listen, this is perfect for this story because." It just is. So, like I said earlier at the top of the interview, those sad love songs and there's so much emotion in them. If I'm trying to write something emotional, and I'm trying to pull a tear, I'm gonna get a good sad love song in there.
Ooh, and that is a good song. I hadn't thought about that. And then I guess, let's see, because I have so many more questions, but I know I feel like I could just ask a whole bunch of questions. So I guess for one, if you had to summarize this book and tell people like one reason why they should read it, what would that reason be?
Well, Yolande Du Bois is a hidden figure, right? We should know about her. Not only did she have this salacious affair with her wedding to Count Cullen, but she also was a powerful woman in her own right. She was a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, incorporated, but it wasn't incorporated back then. And she did such amazing work in education. She was an educator in Baltimore until, for the rest of her life. And so I want her to be known because it wasn't just what her father wanted. She decided and she made choices for her life that made a lasting impact and a legacy. And I think her story deserves to be told.
No, and I will say like that's one of the things I really do love the way that you captured it because while she was the princess of Harlem, she also in her own right, she also was a hard worker. She wasn't just resting on her dad and the family name. Like I like that we got to see her like working in Baltimore. We got to see her writing. We got to see so much of who she was, even getting an education. So I think I really enjoyed seeing that as I was reading. My last question, since some of your books have been made into movies, if you had to cast for this book, who would you want to cast as Yolande and then maybe as Jimmy?
So I can't think of a Jimmy, right? Because I do have someone. He doesn't really look like Jimmy though, but I think he would be a great Jimmy Lunsford. Storm Daniel for Yolande Du Bois. She looks just like her. Um, or not Storm Daniel, Storm Reed.
I could
Yeah.
see that.
He looks just like Yolande. And then for Jimmy, I like Luke James. Just because he, even though he's a
Mm-hmm.
singer and doesn't play the saxophone or anything, or he might, I don't know. I've never seen him playing it, but he is one of those guys that like those artsy men
Mm-hmm.
that kind of just kind of embody like music as emotion. So Storm Reed and Luke James would be my casting choices if I could cast them.
That's good because I think when I was thinking of Jimmy, I could see him in my head, but I couldn't see because I at first thought maybe, but I think he would be too old for Storm because I think
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I was thinking that man Leroyce Hawkins from,
Okay.
but they don't look alike. I just think in my head his body type.
Yeah, see, I can't
Imagine
think
what
of
I thought.
anyone who looks like Jimmy. Another one that I like is, and I don't even know his name, I just know his roles. He was on Game of Thrones, and he's also on the AMC series, The Interview with the Vampire, the black guy. Oh,
I
you
haven't
don't
watched
watch it.
either of
Oh,
that.
I can't think of his name. I'm old, child. I can't think of his name, but I love him as an actor. So those men, black men who can like show sensitivity and emotion, kind of like a younger version of a Sterling K. Brown, right? Sterling K. Brown is that actor that just brings all
Mm.
you know, you just feel safe, like protected, and he has like a sweet vibe to him, but it's still masculine at the same time. That's how I kind of envision Jimmy. So we need a younger version of a Sterling K. Brown for Jimmy.
Man, I love Sterling K. Brown. Okay, I'm gonna keep thinking. If I think of one, I'll send it to you. And then if people want to get in touch with you, how can they go about doing so?
I'm everywhere on the socials. If you really want to talk to me, you can see me on Instagram and Threads the most at Tiffany L. Warren. I also have a website, TiffanyLWarren.com, that has a lot of good resources for writers. And, I edit, I have classes. So my website and then, social media. Come see me.
Perfect. And then I'll put the link below, but please make sure you read A Harlem Wedding. I really loved it. And thank you so much, Tiffany.